Welcome to the Inkpath, where we uncover the strangest, creepiest, and most baffling stories from around the world. I'm Leon Graves, and I'll be your guide as we flip through pages of mystery, from unsolved cases to phenomena that defy everything we think we know about reality. If that sounds like your kind of story, hit subscribe now so you don't miss what we're diving into this week. And today, I want to tell you about a village, remote, forgotten, where humanity may have come face to face with something that wasn't human. The darkness around Emily's house. The village is called Redleaf Hills, a place nearly erased from the map, existing now only in the memories of those who once called it home. It was here that 15-year-old Emily Dawson lived with her family. A tiny community nestled beside thick, tropical forests, where, even at noon, the sunlight barely cut through the trees, swallowed by the calls of strange birds and distant howling monkeys. And at night, the darkness didn't just fall, it moved. Emily had always known peace in her home, but in recent weeks, rumors began to spread. People whispered about shadowy figures, appearing at dusk, standing motionless in the trees, just watching. They didn't look like anyone from the village, and the only thing that stood out from their silhouette were the eyes, green, glowing, like two flames suspended in the forest. The sightings grew, and with them, fear wrapped around Redleaf Hills like vines around a dying tree. The elders spoke of an old legend, the face peelers, creatures said to tear the faces from their victims, slit their throats under cover of darkness, and sell their remains for some unthinkable, inhuman purpose. No one knew if it was true, but the figures kept coming, closer and closer. Families no longer felt safe after dark. Villagers formed patrol groups, watching the tree line with flashlights and shotguns. But something was breaking. Trust, sleep, sanity, peeling away like bark in the wind. And on the edge of the village, in an old wooden house, Emily Dawson stood each evening by her back window, looking out at a garden, at a single grapefruit tree heavy with fruit, and the shadows gathering beneath it, waiting for someone, anyone, to come too close. Get ready, because this story isn't for the faint of heart. Chapter 2. Encounter in the Dark. If you've ever heard the phrase, "the moment your world falls apart," for Emily Dawson, that moment came in the blink of an eye. She was standing frozen in her backyard, a ripe grapefruit still clutched in her hand, halfway to her chest. And just a few feet ahead, between her and the back door, her only way out, stood two figures. I remember what her cousin Clara said later, still shaking when she told us,
"I was washing dishes in the kitchen. Emily had just stepped outside. Not 10 seconds later, I saw her through the window, frozen. Her eyes were locked on something, like she was hypnotized, like she'd turned to stone."
Between Emily and the house were two things, and I hesitate to call them people. They were tall, unnaturally so, and their bodies seemed made of dense, crawling darkness. But the most haunting part? Their eyes, glowing green, cutting through the dusk like twin flames. Later, other witnesses would describe the exact same thing. Those piercing eyes, eyes that seemed to belong to something no longer of this world. Emily didn't scream, didn't run. It was as if her body had already been pulled into another dimension. Then, the taller figure began to move. But it didn't walk, it didn't step. It glided, silently, effortlessly, as if floating through the air. No footsteps, no sound, not even a breeze. Emily exhaled, the air shallow and panicked. She stepped back, and her foot caught on a root. The grapefruit slipped from her hand. Thud, dry, sharp, final. She hit the ground, and just like that, the nightmare began. Cold hands clamped over her face, sealing her mouth and nose. She tried to scream, but no air escaped. She wanted to fight, but the weight on her chest made her limbs useless. Her heart wasn't beating anymore. It was roaring, trapped inside her ribcage. And then, the blade. A thin, gleaming knife. Not a kitchen knife, no. It was more like a box cutter, clean, surgical, and terrifying. The second figure pressed the blade against Emily's throat, light enough not to break the skin, but close enough for her to feel the cold sting of steel. She didn't need an explanation. The posters, the whispers, the tales from the elders, they all crashed into her at once. The face peelers, the ones who stole faces in the dark. They're going to do it, she thought. They're going to take my face, and I'll never come back. But something inside her, deep, primal, ignited like fire on dry grass. With one last surge of adrenaline, Emily twisted her body and kicked, hard. Her foot slammed into one of the creature's chests, knocking it backward. The grip loosened just enough. She screamed, a scream that cracked the silence of the yard. Raw, desperate, not just human, but animal. A scream to survive. In an interview with Sergeant Harold Bryce, a local officer, he recalled,
"We heard it from down the road, a scream like someone being hunted. Not just scared, primal. We knew right away something bad had happened at the Dawson place."
Flashlights flickered through the trees. Boots stomped the dirt. The night patrol was closing in. The moment the creatures sensed movement from the village, they let her go. Emily scrambled to her feet, eyes locked on one thing, the back door. She didn't look back. She ran. Behind her, the grapefruit lay in the dirt, surrounded by smeared handprints and knee marks in the soft earth. As she reached the steps, the patrol's floodlights swept the yard. One of them, Uncle Francis, an old hunter, raised his rifle. "Down!" he shouted. No response. "Fire!" someone yelled. Gunshots tore through the air. Emily turned, not to see if they'd hit, but to see if she'd really just escaped death, and what she saw shattered all logic. The figures weren't running. They weren't falling. They were rising. Their feet lifted off the ground. They hovered, weightless, motionless, still staring at Emily with those glowing green eyes. The bullets hit them, but no blood came, no flinching, no pain. They just floated, like ghostly shadows pulled upward by invisible threads, and slowly, silently, faded into the night. The entire encounter lasted maybe 2 minutes, but to Emily, it was a lifetime. And to Redleaf Hills, it was a warning. The darkness had arrived, and the last bit of faith they had left was about to be swallowed whole. Chapter 3. The Scream and the Gunshots. You know what haunted me the most? It wasn't what Emily saw. It was what people heard. Or more accurately, what they didn't hear. Survivors didn't mention footsteps, or breathing, or moans. Nothing that sounded remotely human. The only sound anyone recalled was Emily's scream. In an audio interview with me, Nurse Lisa, head ER nurse at Redleaf General, shared,
"It was around 7:15 that night. We got a call from the patrol team. The voice on the line was panicked. One of them literally screamed into the phone. She screamed like her soul was leaving her body. And let me tell you, I've been a nurse for 19 years. I've never heard terror like that."
Emily was running, or more like stumbling, like she'd just been ripped out of her own body. She collapsed in the yard, just as the first gunshots cracked through the air behind her. Everything shattered. Bang! Bang! Rat-a-tat-tat! The patrol's floodlights whipped across the garden, scanning the darkness where the two figures had released Emily just moments earlier, now slipping into the trees. But then, something impossible happened. They didn't run. They rose. Every member of the night patrol later gave the same account. Two towering figures. No wings, no noise. They didn't leap or jump. They just floated upward. No dust, no wind, no smoke. Their green eyes still glowed, not from light reflecting, but from something within. Lieutenant Gabriel Warren, who led the patrol that night, wrote in his official report,
"We fired twice. Once at close range, and again as they lifted into the air. At least 3 rounds hit, but there was no reaction. No being of flesh could take that kind of firepower and not drop instantly, but they didn't even flinch."
Emily knew she needed to run, to make it to the door before she vanished into the dark again. But instead, she stood there, paralyzed, her eyes locked on the two floating beings. They weren't afraid. They weren't fleeing. They just watched her, calm, unshaken, like they didn't belong to the physical world at all. Ben, Clara's husband and a member of the patrol, told me later,
"You ever see something, and you just know, deep in your soul, that it isn't from here. That moment, I didn't just shake. I forgot how to speak.
The figures floated slowly, like souls leaving their bodies. And as they rose, the entire Dawson backyard was filled with sound, but none of it came from them. It came from those left behind. Emily's quiet, sobbing gasps, voices shouting, "Get down!" The wind rustling the trees, gunfire, slowing down, faltering, and then stopping completely. Because no one knew what they were shooting at anymore. And then they were gone. They dissolved, like mist, fading into the night, leaving only thick air and the tang of gunpowder behind. The backyard fell silent, like the world itself was holding its breath. Emily was carried into the house by Clara, her face streaked with tears, hair tangled with leaves, mud, and even blood, though later doctors confirmed she hadn't been injured. But that didn't comfort anyone. In fact, that's what terrified them most. She hadn't been stabbed, hadn't been beaten, no one was physically hurt. Yet the entire patrol was trembling, not because they feared being attacked, but because they feared what they saw was real. These weren't people. No one takes 3 hits from an M600 and just floats away. And perhaps most chilling of all, they didn't come to rob. They didn't speak. They didn't take anything. They came for Emily. But why? All they left behind was a single grapefruit, cold, dirty, lying in the middle of the yard. And a question no one was willing to answer. That night was logged in the patrol's official journal as Entry 0-1, Initial Contact. No one dared call it communication. But everyone in Redleaf Hills knew one thing. They came here, and they might not have left. Chapter 4. The Fracture of Faith. I don't believe in explanations anymore. That was the very first thing Ronald Clay, village chief of Redleaf Hills, and stepfather to Emily Dawson, said to me when we met just weeks after the incident. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't tremble, but in his eyes I saw a weariness I'd only ever seen in war veterans. We prepared for it. Guns, floodlights, comms. But how do you prepare for something you can't even understand? That night never left him, or the dozens of villagers who witnessed what happened. In psychology, they call it a core belief collapse, when your entire worldview, your logic, your sense of what's real falls out from under you. Emily, despite having no physical injuries, was taken that very night to a makeshift infirmary inside Clay's home. Her cousin, Clara, was the one who carried her in, tucked her under a blanket, and didn't say a word for hours.
She didn't cry, didn't speak, but her eyes, they stayed wide open, unblinking. I've seen that look before, on soldiers who came back from the Gulf. But Emily? She's 15. Almost no one in Redleaf Hills slept that night. Children screamed. Adults took turns voting on whether they should evacuate. Some called family in nearby cities, but no one dared say out loud what had really happened, because it wasn't just Emily. The whole town was now grappling with a fear so vague, so invisible, it couldn't be fought with logic. People weren't even sure if they could trust what they'd seen, or the reports, or their own minds.
Extract from Night Patrol Log, July 29th, 2023, 7:32 p.m. Suspected entity sighted. 7:33 p.m. Fired 3 rounds. No physical reaction observed. 7:34 p.m. 2 figures levitated approximately 10 to 12 feet off the ground. 7:35 p.m. Visual contact lost. Unable to pursue. 7:41 p.m. Emily Dawson confirmed safe. No visible injuries. But focus on that 7:35 mark, because from that moment on, the definition of danger in Redleaf Hills changed permanently. After the event, Ronald Clay and 5 members of the Night Patrol requested a meeting with the county office to file a report. They submitted a short video, captured by a tactical officer's body cam. Though the footage was warped with static, dark shadows, and dust, one thing was clear. 2 large gray figures slowly lifting off the ground. No crouch, no jump, just a weightless rise, like spirits in the morning fog.
If you think I'm lying, go look at the scorch marks still on the grass. Talk to the folks who haven't opened their doors in 3 days. And if you still believe this was just some guys in jetpacks, then congratulations. You've got stronger nerves than I do.
In the 3 days that followed, calls to the border police station increased fivefold. Most were vague. Figures in the trees. Eyes glowing at the edge of my yard. A burnt smell in the night air. No hard evidence, just panic, fermenting in a community whose trust had been shattered. As for Emily, she said nothing. She just wrote in her old notebook, short phrases, the same ones, over and over. They came to see me, but why me? They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The light in their eyes cast no shadow. So, are they real? She still ate, showered, lived, but she slept with the lights on, and refused to let anyone turn off the radio by her bed, always tuned to soft news or classical music, playing through the night. Some things, even unseen, can shatter a soul. Ronald's final words to me near the end of our interview.
I used to laugh when the kids said the face peelers were real. I even joked with Emily that maybe our grapefruit was magical. That's why the aliens wanted it. Now? God, I wish. I hadn't let her go outside that night, even just for a minute.
The horror of that night didn't scream like a banshee or explode like a rifle shot. It crept in, like moisture in old wood, slowly, fracturing the very faith that had once held this village together. From that night forward, Redleaf Hills was no longer just a place. It became a living memory, a scar on the timeline of something that crossed over, from out there into here, and for those who looked up that night and saw two glowing green eyes floating silently in the sky, no proof, no theory could ever explain what they now knew. Deep down, without a doubt. Chapter 5. When the government arrives. At first, I thought, finally, someone's here to help. That's what Ronald Clay, the village chief of Redleaf Hills, and Emily Dawson's stepfather, quietly said when I asked him about the investigative task force from Lima that arrived just days after the incident. But the look in his eyes told me the rest. They came, but no one really listened. August 3rd, 2023, a 6-person team arrived in Redleaf Hills, composed of 4 Peruvian Ministry of Interior officials and 2 civilian experts, one in aerospace technology, the other in community trauma psychology. They brought geomagnetic scanners, signal jammers, chemical sensors, and a whole arsenal of skepticism. Excerpt from the official government report, later released publicly in Lima. Evidence of illegal mining activity discovered north of Redleaf Hills Forest. Traces suggest temporary use of personal jetpack devices. Bodycam footage deemed affected by low light conditions and group visual hallucination factors. Emily Dawson's condition attributed to acute stress response triggered by collective fear contagion. Conclusion: no signs of paranormal, extraterrestrial, or supernatural activity. Highly probable this was a fear tactic meant to deter interference with an illegal mining operation. When I asked Ronald if he believed any of that, he simply shook his head.
I read the whole report, watched them look for tire tracks, cigarette butts, anything. But they found nothing. Some folks said they saw a faint green glow in the woods the night before. The task force said it was probably a headlight glare from illegal loggers. Well then, why was that glow floating 13 feet off the ground?
I read the whole report, watched them look for tire tracks, cigarette butts, anything. But they found nothing. Some folks said they saw a faint green glow in the woods the night before. The task force said it was probably a headlight glare from illegal loggers. Well then, why was that glow floating 13 feet off the ground?
The investigation lasted 8 days. In that time, the village barely breathed. Lights stayed on all night. Kids slept with their parents. The patrol team doubled in number. But nothing happened. No more figures. No more glowing eyes. No blades in the wind. Just silence. And that's when suspicion began to grow, not toward the creatures, but toward each other. Excerpt from Emily's journal during the investigation. They came with maps, notebooks, and eyes that looked at me like I was fiction. They don't believe me, or worse, they do, and pretend not to. If they can fabricate a reason to dismiss what they saw with their own eyes, what else could they fabricate? Of the dozens of photos taken from the scene, one image, blurry, shadow-stained, was tacked to the task force's makeshift office wall. It showed two figures rising above the forest floor, caught on a patrol officer's body cam. The final verdict scribbled beneath it? Artifactual image. To the villagers of Redleaf Hills, that term meant only one thing. They were never going to be allowed to tell their story the way it truly happened.
They say I'm paranoid. I say, when you unload 5 rounds straight into something and it doesn't flinch, doesn't fall, do you trust the bullets or your own damn eyes?
Eventually, the task force packed up. They left behind tire tracks, 3 rolls of caution tape around the forest edge, and a polished report no one ever bothered to post on the village bulletin board. Redleaf Hills never held a public town meeting to announce the government's findings, because no one wanted to hear what they already knew, but could never say. Emily stood silently as the convoy of trucks disappeared down the dusty road. She didn't look relieved. She didn't look angry. Her gaze was distant, like something was still unfinished, like the story wasn't over. Because once darkness has made its way into your life, what you need isn't an explanation. What you need is someone to finally admit it was real. Chapter 6. Truth Behind the Dark. I can't forget the way it looked at me, through the window, the night before it left town, as if it had never been far, as if it never really left us. That's what Emily Dawson whispered to me during a late-night interview, as we sat beside the old wood-burning stove in her family's dimly lit cabin on the edge of Redleaf Hills. Roughly 2 weeks after the government task force pulled out, an eerie stillness settled over the town. No more strange sounds, no lights in the forest, no whispers in the wind. To the authorities, that silence was a good sign. To us, to Emily, to the night patrol, it felt like the calm before the second wave. I returned to Redleaf Hills one final time, late August. I spent 2 days visiting old contacts and eventually made my way to the Dawson house, where I met Emily's mother, Caroline Dawson. A thin, soft-spoken woman, but with eyes like carved stone. We sat in her quiet kitchen. A single candle flickered on the table, carving shadows into the deep lines of her face, like the rings inside a tree that's seen too many winters.
Maybe they wanted to calm things down, to keep us from panicking. But when my daughter came home that night, her clothes torn, bruises around her neck, and not a single person in charge asked for a doctor, a psychologist, or even showed an ounce of belief. That's when I knew. To them, Redleaf Hills is just a dot on the map.
She kept tugging gently at her shirt hem, eyes locked on the old grapefruit tree outside. Lonely, weathered, and very much still standing. Emily barely left her room at night. When I asked if I could speak with her privately, Caroline nodded and handed me a small stack of handwritten pages. Emily's journal, August 12th. I dream of them, but it's not blood or blades. It's their eyes, like they can see all my thoughts. They don't speak English, they don't speak at all, but I can hear them inside my head. A small, cold voice, cutting straight through my spine. They didn't come to kill me, they came to warn me? Emily's memory of the encounter had fractured into loops, replaying like a broken film reel. But what shocked her doctors the most was how she responded to trauma.
Emily's case is unusual. She doesn't deny what happened. She doesn't avoid the subject. She recounts it with eerie calm. When I asked, "Are you afraid they'll come back?" she replied, "No, because I always knew they never left."
A week after leaving town, I received an anonymous email, just a single line in the body. From Gabriel, and one attachment. It was a 27-minute voice memo, clearly recorded on a phone. The voice, Lieutenant Gabriel Warren, and in that file, a confession.
I saw them. They weren't wearing flight suits. No jetpacks. I served in Panama. I know what jetpacks sound like. What I saw that night, there was no wind. They floated. No feet, no weight. They moved with the silence of a graveyard. I fired 4 rounds. The bullets passed through, like smoke. No blood, no groan, no reaction, just those eyes. Even as I pulled the trigger, they were still looking right at me.
I sent the recording to the Ministry of Interior in Lima. A week later, I received an official response. File received. Under Psychological Event Debriefing Protocol, insufficient evidence to reopen investigation. No denial, no confirmation, just silence. I returned to Redleaf Hills once more. It was colder this time, the nights longer. Every house now had thick blackout curtains. Tiny mirrors hung from porch eaves, like quiet little amulets against the unknown. Back inside the Dawson kitchen, Emily sat quietly. She was holding her third journal, her fingers resting on the cover. I asked her in a low voice, "Do you think they'll come back?" She looked up. Her eyes found mine, still but echoing like a bell in an empty church. They never left. And in that moment, I believed her. They are still in Redleaf Hills, waiting, not to hunt, but to see when we, as humans, finally adjust to the darkness enough to notice them again. One more time, or maybe for the last time. Chapter 7. The Truth That Lives in Shadows. I don't know how to describe it properly. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like something I already knew, as if my soul had seen it 1,000 times, long before my body realized it. That's what Emily Dawson whispered to me in the attic room, her voice barely louder than the autumn wind scraping through broken shutters. Scattered journal pages lined the sill beside her. I had returned to Redleaf Hills that late fall afternoon, cold wind cutting through the trees, the sky a flat sheet of gray. Nearly 3 months had passed since the incident, with no new sightings. But for Emily, silence wasn't peace. It was a warning. Her mother, Caroline Dawson, met me at the door with tired eyes and a look that said everything. We're still here, and so is it. The kitchen hadn't changed. The old grapefruit tree behind the house was dead now, bare, dry branches scraping the window whenever the wind picked up. Emily never stepped onto the back porch anymore. She spent her days writing, so much that her fingertips had blistered and black ink stained the dining table. She let me read a few new entries. Over and over again, one phrase appeared. They're waiting, not to kill, to witness. They need us to believe in the dark, so we stop searching for light.
Emily shows no signs of delusion, no dissociation, no post-traumatic hallucinations. She's quiet but sharply aware. We ran standard sensory response tests. Her reaction time wasn't just accurate, it was so fast I had to recalibrate the timer. When I asked, what if they weren't real? She smiled faintly and said, sometimes the things that aren't real are the only ones that never leave you.
A week after my visit, I received a phone call from a blocked local number. The voice was faint, but unmistakable. Lieutenant Gabriel Warren.
You need to come back. Something's getting closer. I hear it in the rain, not with my ears, but in my head. Last night, something stood outside the barracks. We set up a camera. It caught nothing but the sound, like metal on glass, light as breath, but it went straight down my spine.
I returned to Redleaf Hills the following night. The village was darker than ever, not a single light in the inn. Every house shuttered tight before dusk. I stayed in the old ranger's cabin near the edge of town. That night, I heard it. Not loud, not clear, but there, a metallic scrape, like long fingernails across thick glass. And just as I turned on the light, it vanished, leaving behind only a faint condensation smudge in the shape of an eye, a glowing eye. The next morning, I visited Emily again. She was sorting through a thick stack of handwritten notes. She didn't look surprised to see me. She only asked, "You heard it too, didn't you?" I nodded, and then she said the one thing I hadn't expected, but somehow already knew. I don't think they came to take us. I think they came to see how long it takes for us to destroy ourselves in the dark. They don't need to attack. They only need to exist and watch.
We're not denying that Redleaf Hills experienced something unexplainable, but no physical evidence, no actionable suspect. We can't reopen the case. We did receive a strange audio file from the night patrol. It contained a frequency band that didn't match any civilian tech. The transmission was labeled Unclassified Anomaly, Case Closed. But me, personally, I don't believe it's over.
Emily now calls it the eye at the window. Each night, she returns to that same kitchen window, the one where she first saw them floating above the grapefruit tree. She's not waiting for help. not expecting answers. She simply writes, and every entry circles back to one truth. They didn't come from anywhere. They aren't aliens. They aren't aircraft. They are the deepest shadow inside us, now made visible. Recently, the village council made an unusual decision. No one is allowed outside after 5 p.m. Homes are sealed. Ancient symbols are carved into doorways. Mirrors hang from porches. And once a month, they hold an old ceremony. The Night of Reflection. A tradition lost for over 80 years, where every villager must face their own image in complete darkness. I don't know if it's resistance or surrender. But the last time I left Redleaf Hills, I had the overwhelming sense that something, not someone, was watching from the hilltop above. In the fog, motionless, silent. And exactly as Emily once said, they never left. And I believed her, because somewhere deep inside, I was no longer afraid of the dark. I had started to recognize it, and finally saw not what I wanted to see, but what had always been waiting for me to open my eyes. Thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, you now know more than most people ever will about what happened in that break room. But the story isn't over. There's still the basement, the notebooks, and the one question no one can answer. Why? Subscribe to the Inkpath if you haven't already, and don't miss what comes next. New episodes every Tuesday and Friday. I'm Leon Graves. I'll see you in the next one.